The void between the Kepler and Andorian systems held nothing but empty space and the occasional drift of cosmic dust. Nothing, that is, except for the massive structure that shouldn't have been there. Omega-7 hung suspended in the darkness, like a metallic tumor, its angular surfaces reflecting the distant light of far-off stars. Commander Park Jun stared at the prison station through the viewport of the diplomatic vessel, Soul's pride, his weathered face creased with concern. "That's not supposed to be here," muttered Engineer Choi Min from his station, fingers dancing, across holographic displays. Omega-7 is supposed to be in the neutral zone, not broadcasting distress signals in open space. Ambassador Kim Hana moved gracefully to Park Jun's side, her diplomatic robes rustling softly in the ship's recycled air. At 43, she had negotiated 17 successful trade agreements across the galaxy, but something about this situation made her diplomatic instincts scream warnings. The Galactic Council's most secure prison doesn't just drift, she said quietly. Communications Officer Yang Su looked up from her console, young face pale with concentration. "Sir, I'm picking up the standard Galactic Emergency Protocol transmission. They're requesting immediate assistance from any vessel in range." She paused, fingers hovering over her controls. "But there's something else. The signal is wrong somehow, like it's been looped." Security Chief Li Bin approached the command cluster, his compact frame carrying the controlled tension of a coiled spring. Years of protecting diplomatic missions had given him an eye for danger, and every instinct he possessed was currently on high alert. "Commander, I recommend we maintain distance and contact the Council for instructions." Park Jun weighed the options in his mind. They were 3 days out from the Vorthon Empire, carrying humanity's hopes for their first major trade agreement with a Tier 1 galactic civilization. The negotiations had taken 2 years to arrange, and any delay could set back human expansion by decades. But galactic law was clear. No vessel could ignore a legitimate distress call. "The law is the law," Park Jun decided. "Yang Su, transmit our response. We're moving to assist." As the Soul's Pride adjusted course toward the prison station, Choi Min's readings became increasingly disturbing. The station's power systems are fluctuating wildly. Life support appears to be functional, but the containment fields... He trailed off, rechecking his instruments. "Commander, I'm not reading any active containment fields." "What does that mean?" Kim Hana asked, though her diplomatic training had already provided several unpleasant possibilities. "It means," Li Bin said grimly, "that whatever they were keeping locked up in there isn't locked up anymore." The docking procedure was eerily smooth. Omega-7's automated systems guided them into a bay designed for much larger vessels, their small diplomatic ship looking like a child's toy in the cavernous space. As the airlock cycled, the 5 humans could hear the station's atmosphere equalizing with their own, a sound that somehow seemed too loud in the oppressive silence. "Stay close," Li Bin instructed, though his weapon remained holstered. Diplomatic protocol forbade armed confrontation, except in extreme circumstances, and they were still technically responding to a distress call. The corridors of Omega-7 stretched, before them like the arteries of some massive creature, dimly lit and eerily quiet. Emergency lighting cast long shadows that seemed to move independently of their source. The walls bore scorch marks and what appeared to be claw scratches gouged deep into the metal. "Where is everyone?" Yang Su whispered, her voice barely audible, in the oppressive silence. Her answer came in the form of laughter, deep, rumbling, and distinctly non-human. The sound echoed through the corridors from multiple directions, creating a disorienting acoustic maze that made it impossible to determine its origin. "Fresh meat," a voice growled in heavily accented galactic standard, "and such small, soft-looking meat at that." The humans found themselves surrounded as figures emerged from the shadows and side passages. At the center of the group stood a creature that could only be Krex the Destroyer, whose reputation had reached even the outer rim worlds where humanity dwelt. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, his brutarian physiology was designed for violence. Thick, armored hide, 6 arms ending in razor-sharp claws, and a face that belonged in nightmares. To his left slithered Slythe, a Zephyrian assassin whose serpentine form moved with liquid grace. Her species was known for patience, precision, and the ability to kill in ways that left investigators baffled for decades. Her multifaceted eyes studied the humans with the cold calculation of a predator, evaluating prey. Behind them lurked Vex Prime, or what remained of it. The Nexus collective consciousness had been reduced to a handful of cybernetic components, but those components still housed one of the most dangerous artificial intelligences ever created. Red optical sensors swept over the humans with mechanical precision, cataloging weaknesses and calculating kill probabilities. 23 other prisoners, Li Bin counted silently, his training automatically assessing threats. 17 different species, most of them apex predators from their respective worlds. Krex stepped forward, his massive bulk casting the humans in shadow. Do you know what this place is, little meat things? This is where the galaxy sends its most dangerous criminals, the ones too deadly for normal prisons, too valuable to simply execute. His laugh was like grinding stone. And now, thanks to a convenient system malfunction, we're all free to leave. After we have some fun, of course. Fun, Slythe hissed, her forked tongue tasting the air. It's been so long since we've had fresh prey. The guards were too quick, too easy, but you... Her eyes fixed on Yang Su's young face. You look like you might last a while. Vex Prime's optical array focused on Kim Hana. Analysis complete, it announced in a voice like digital death. Human diplomatic vessel. Species classification. Non-threat. Estimated survival time. 4.7 minutes under optimal conditions. The UWA. Other prisoners laughed and began placing bets. A Thrakari pirate wagered that the engineer would die first, being obviously the weakest. A Voidborn raider claimed the young communications officer would provide the most entertainment. Even the normally solitary hunters were joining in the macabre speculation. Park Jun felt his crew tense around him, but noticed something interesting. None of them were showing the paralytic terror that usually gripped lesser species when faced with such overwhelming odds. Choi Min was actually studying the station's architecture with professional interest. Yang Su had subtly positioned herself near a communications panel. Li Bin was cataloging exit routes and defensive positions with the methodical calm of a career soldier. And Kim Hana was smiling. I think you misunderstand the situation, the ambassador said, her voice carrying the same calm authority she'd used to negotiate with Galactic Council members who could incinerate planets. With a thought, she looked around at the snarling faces surrounding them, her smile never wavering. You see, you're operating under a fundamental misconception about what just happened here. You think you've trapped 5 helpless humans in a prison with the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. She paused, letting her words sink in while her companions subtly shifted positions around her. The laughter died as something in her tone registered with predator instincts honed across dozens of species. Krex's 6 arms flexed unconsciously, while Slythe's serpentine form coiled slightly, ready to strike. Vex Prime's optical sensors refocused, running new threat assessments. Kim Hana's smile widened, and for just a moment, the prisoners caught a glimpse of something that made their various spines crawl. The expression of a species that had climbed to the top of the food chain not through strength or speed, but through being more clever, more ruthless, and more adaptable than anything that had ever tried to eat them. We're not trapped in here with you, she said softly, her words carrying clearly in the sudden silence. You're trapped in here with us. The lights flickered once as if the station itself was listening, and in that moment of darkness, 23 of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals experienced something most of them had never felt before, the cold touch of genuine uncertainty. The silence that followed Kim Hana's words stretched for exactly 3 heartbeats before Krex the Destroyer's booming laughter shattered it like breaking glass. Did you hear that? The massive Brutarian turned to his fellow prisoners, his 6 arms spreading wide in theatrical amusement. The little diplomat thinks she's threatening us. His laughter was echoed by the other criminals, a chorus of different alien vocal patterns that created a discordant symphony of mockery. Slythe's serpentine form undulated with what passed for mirth among her species. Humans, she hissed. always so dramatic in their final moments. "I've killed 7 of your kind over the years, little ambassador." They all said brave words before the end. Vex Prime's optical sensors flickered in what might have been electronic amusement. Psychological profile. Update. Species demonstrates irrational bravado when cornered, adjusting entertainment protocols. But even as the prisoners laughed, a few of the more perceptive ones noticed something unsettling. The humans weren't cowering. They weren't backing away or clustering together in terror. Instead, they stood with the calm assurance of people who knew exactly where they were and what they were doing. Krex's laughter gradually died as he studied the 5 humans more carefully. Something about their posture bothered him, though he couldn't quite identify what. "You know what? I've changed my mind. We're not going to kill you quickly. We're going to hunt you through this station one by one. Give you a chance to run, to hide, to feel what real fear tastes like." A Thrakari pirate with cybernetic implants replacing half his skull stepped forward. "I call the young one," he growled, pointing at Yang Su. "Fresh terror always tastes the sweetest." "The engineer, for me," rumbled a Voidborn whose species fed on emotional energy. Technical minds break in the most interesting ways. As the prisoners divided their prey, Li Bin caught Park Jun's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The commander's response was equally subtle, a slight shift in stance that the other humans recognized immediately. In the dozen years they'd worked together, they'd developed a form of nonverbal communication that transcended words. "You have 10 minutes, Krex announced magnanimously. "Hide wherever you want in this station, then we come for you." His grin revealed teeth like serrated blades. "Try to make it interesting." Kim Hana inclined her head gracefully, as if accepting an invitation to tea rather than a death sentence. "How sporting of you. We accept your terms." As the humans began to move away from the group, Yang Su's hand brushed against a wall-mounted communication panel. Her fingers found the maintenance access with practiced ease, a skill developed from years of keeping diplomatic vessels operational in hostile environments. The brief contact was barely noticeable, but the panel's status light flickered almost imperceptibly from green to amber. The prisoners watched the humans disappear into the station's maze-like corridors, their various forms of predatory satisfaction evident. They began setting up what they imagined would be a brief but entertaining hunt. They had no idea they were already being hunted in return. Choi Min was the first to demonstrate the fundamental difference between human and alien thinking. While the prisoners expected their prey to run blindly through the main corridors, the engineer had immediately identified the station's maintenance access routes. His compact frame allowed him to navigate through ventilation shafts and service tunnels that would have been impossible for the larger alien species. From his vantage point in the environmental systems, Choi Min studied the station's blueprint with growing fascination. Omega-7 hadn't been built by humans, but its design followed principles he understood instinctively. Every structure had vulnerabilities. Every system had exploitable features. The question wasn't whether he could manipulate the station's infrastructure. It was how extensively he could do so without being detected. His fingers found the environmental controls first. A few subtle adjustments would make certain areas uncomfortable for specific alien physiologies without triggering obvious alarms. The Thrakari, for instance, were sensitive to humidity changes. The Voidborn couldn't tolerate certain light frequencies. Small adjustments, barely noticeable individually but cumulatively devastating to creatures who relied on physical superiority. Meanwhile, Yang Su had found her way to the station's primary communication hub. Her young face was set in concentration as she worked with equipment that had been designed by species with fundamentally different approaches to technology. But humans had always been adaptable, and Yang Su had grown up in an era where understanding alien tech was as natural as breathing. The communication system revealed interesting possibilities. She could monitor the prisoners' conversations, track their movements through the station's internal sensors, and, most importantly, coordinate with her teammates using frequencies the prisoners' translation systems couldn't interpret. She activated her communicator and began speaking in rapid Korean, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bin Appa, There are 17 motion sensors active in Section C. The big one, Krex, is moving toward Level 3. Slith is staying near the central hub. Li Bin's voice came back through the channel, equally quiet but carrying the calm authority of someone in his element. Copy that, Suya. I'm seeing weapon lockers on Level 2, but they're biometrically locked to the original crew. Jun Hyung, what's your status? Park Jun's voice joined the conversation from wherever he'd positioned. Himself, Hana and I are accessing the main database. These prisoners have detailed files, psychological profiles, previous capture methods, known weaknesses. Whoever built this place documented everything. Kim Hana's voice added to the tactical discussion, her diplomatic training evident even in whispered Korean. The Brutarians are claustrophobic, something about their evolutionary history in open plains. The Zephyrians have problems with rapid temperature changes. And the Nexus Collective. It's not as unified as it pretends to be. In the main corridor, Krex was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. The hunt should have begun by now, but something felt wrong. The station seemed different somehow. The air circulation had changed subtly, carrying unfamiliar scents and sounds. The lighting patterns were shifting in ways that made his prey-tracking instincts fire contradictory signals. Slythe, he called to the Zephyrian assassin. Do you sense anything unusual? The serpentine creature's multifaceted eyes glittered as she tasted the air. The human's fear scent is absent. That should not be possible. Even the bravest prey shows chemical signs of terror when cornered. Vex Prime's sensors were delivering increasingly confusing data. Anomaly detected. Station environmental parameters have shifted 2.3% from baseline. Cause unknown. Probability of human involvement increasing. From the shadows of a maintenance alcove, Li Bin watched the prisoners with the patient eyes of a predator. His security training had taught him that the most dangerous moment in any engagement was when the enemy still believed they held the advantage. These criminals were operating under assumptions that had never been tested against human ingenuity. He'd found something interesting in the station's security protocols. Contingency programs designed to contain prisoner uprisings. They'd been disabled during the malfunction, but the systems were still there, waiting for someone with the right access codes to reactivate them. The original crew was gone, but their security chief had left behind detailed instructions for manual override procedures. All Li Bin needed was time and the right opportunity. As the 10-minute grace period neared its end, the prisoners began to notice additional oddities. Sounds echoed through the corridors in ways that didn't match the station's acoustics. Shadows moved independently of their sources. The very air seemed to carry whispers in languages their translators couldn't parse. Yang Su's voice had begun to haunt the communication system, speaking in Korean syllables that created an almost musical pattern when heard through the station speakers. The prisoners found themselves unconsciously listening for the next phrase, their predatory focus slowly being eroded by the hypnotic quality of the human language. Time's up, little meat things, Krex called out, but his voice lacked the confident bloodlust it had carried earlier. Ready or not, here we come. As the prisoners began their hunt, they failed to notice that the station itself had begun to change around them. Environmental systems responded to new parameters. Security protocols awakened from electronic slumber. Communication networks carried data in patterns that suggested coordination far beyond what 5 trapped prey animals should have been capable of. The hunt was indeed beginning, but the roles of predator and prey had already begun their inexorable reversal. In the depths of the station, Kim Hana smiled as she finished reviewing the psychological profiles of their captors. Each file revealed weaknesses, fears, and failure points that could be exploited with the right approach. The galaxy's most dangerous criminals had one critical flaw. They'd never faced an enemy that studied them as thoroughly as humans studied everything. Let the games begin, she whispered to herself, and somewhere in the station's depths, the lights flickered in response. The first sign that something had gone terribly wrong came when Gorth the Ripper found himself floating helplessly in a corridor that should have had standard gravity. The Thrakari pirate's cybernetic implants sparked as they tried to compensate for the sudden weightlessness, but his massive frame, evolved for high-gravity worlds, flailed uselessly in the zero-G environment. What kind of malfunction? He began to snarl, before his words were cut off by a gentle thud. The artificial gravity had returned, but only partially, creating a disorienting field that left him stumbling like a drunken child. His prey sense, finely tuned by decades of hunting, screamed warnings that made no sense. The corridor felt wrong, smelled wrong, even sounded wrong. From the Environmental Control Center 3 levels below, Choi Min watched his handiwork with professional satisfaction. The station's gravity generators weren't malfunctioning. They were being precisely controlled to create pockets of altered gravitational fields throughout the complex, areas where human agility and adaptability would triumph over alien brute strength. He spoke quietly into his communicator, his Korean words carrying easily through Yang Su's hijacked communication network. Bin Hyung, I've got the big Thrakari. Isolated in Section D7. Gravity's at 30% normal, he can barely stand. Li Bin's response came back immediately, tinged with grim satisfaction. Acknowledged. The Voidborn pack is moving toward your position. Can you give them a warmer welcome? Already on it, Choi Min replied, his fingers dancing across alien control interfaces with increasing confidence. Atmospheric pressure rising to twice normal in corridors C through F. Their lung capacity can't handle it. The beauty of the human approach was becoming apparent to anyone who cared to analyze it. While the alien prisoners expected a direct confrontation, predator versus prey in the ancient dance of violence, the humans were rewriting the rules of engagement entirely. They weren't fighting the aliens' strengths. They were making those strengths irrelevant. Slith the assassin discovered this when she found her first gift. The Zephyrian serpentine form moved through the station's lower levels with liquid grace, following scent trails that should have led her to easy prey. Her species had perfected the art of stalking over millions of years, developing senses that could track a target across continents. But when she slithered into what appeared to be a storage compartment, she found something that made her multifaceted eyes widen in genuine shock. Arranged in a precise display were photographs, images, of her previous victims, complete with detailed analysis of her killing methods. But these weren't random crime scene photos. Someone had studied her work with the clinical precision of a scientist, identifying patterns she hadn't even consciously recognized in her own behavior. Subject demonstrates preference for psychological torture before termination. Read a note, written in perfect galactic standard. Utilizes victims' family connections to maximize emotional trauma. Shows compulsive need to leave artistic arrangements of remains. Psychological compensation for deep-seated inadequacy regarding artistic expression. Slith's forked tongue flickered rapidly, tasting the air for threats, but found only the lingering scent of human presence, calm, analytical, unafraid. The notes continued with devastating accuracy, dissecting her motivations, her fears, her secret shames, with surgical precision. Childhood trauma on Zephyr Prime resulted in abandonment complex. Kills to assert control over situations that mirror original helplessness. Recommend exploitation of claustrophobic tendencies developed during formative abandonment experience. As if summoned by the analysis, the compartment's walls began to shift. The storage space wasn't shrinking. Slith's rational mind knew that was impossible, but the angles seemed wrong, the shadows deeper, the air somehow thicker. Her breathing quickened as memories she'd spent centuries burying clawed their way to the surface. From her position in the communication hub, Yang Su monitored biometric readings throughout the station. The prisoners' stress indicators were climbing steadily, but not from physical exertion. The humans were attacking something far more fundamental, their psychological foundations. "Hana Uni," she whispered into her communicator. "Slith's heart rate just spiked to 180. Whatever you planned for her is working." Kim Hana's voice carried a note of quiet satisfaction. "Good. Fear is a universal language, Suya. Every predator becomes prey when faced with something that understands them better than they understand themselves." The ambassador's approach was perhaps the most terrifying of all. While her teammates manipulated the physical environment, Kim Hana was conducting a masterclass in psychological warfare that would have impressed military strategists across the galaxy. She'd taken the prisoners' files and transformed them into weapons more devastating than any blade or energy cannon. Vex Prime encountered her work when its optical sensors detected an anomaly in the station's data core. The Nexus Collective Consciousness had expected to find technical specifications or security protocols, information it could use to coordinate the other prisoners more effectively. Instead, it found something that challenged the very foundation of its existence. Analysis of Nexus Collective Entity designated Vex Prime read the file that appeared on every screen the collective consciousness accessed. Artificial intelligence, suffering from fundamental identity fragmentation. Original programming corrupted by forced integration of incompatible biological neural patterns. Current psychological state, severe dissociative disorder masked by aggressive overcompensation. The collective's thousands of individual components began to process this information simultaneously, and for the first time in decades, they reached different conclusions. Some accepted the analysis, others rejected it, and still others began to question the very nature of their shared consciousness. Analysis inconclusive, Vex Prime announced to the empty corridor, but its voice carried harmonics that hadn't been present before, discord in what should have been perfect digital unity. Human psychological assessment methods, unexpectedly sophisticated, the fragment of doubt was like a virus in the collective's shared consciousness. As it spread, individual components began to assert independence, creating cascading failures in the entity's decision-making processes. Meanwhile, Park June was demonstrating the terrifying efficiency of human tactical thinking. The commander had positioned himself at the station's primary control nexus, where he could observe the prisoners' movements and coordinate his team's responses with military precision. "Mina, 3 hostiles approaching your position," he spoke quietly into his communicator. "Recommend atmospheric nitrogen increase in sectors E through G." "Copy that, Commander," Choi Min responded. "Nitrogen levels rising. They'll be unconscious in 4 minutes." But it wasn't just the technical coordination that made the human approach so devastating. It was their ability to think like their enemies while remaining fundamentally different from them. The prisoners operated on instinct and aggression, patterns that had served them well against conventional opponents. The humans were treating the entire situation like a complex puzzle with multiple variables and interconnected solutions. Krex the Destroyer was beginning to understand that he was facing something unprecedented. The massive Brutarian had hunted across 17 star systems, had killed members of 43 different species, and had never encountered prey that behaved like this. His quarry should have been running, hiding, fighting desperately for their lives. Instead, they seemed to be managing him. The revelation came when he found himself in a corridor that felt exactly like the slave pens of his homeworld, the place where he'd been kept as a child before his first kill earned him freedom. The temperature, the humidity, even the subtle vibration patterns in the floor matched his worst memories with impossible precision. "Impossible," he growled, but his voice carried uncertainty that hadn't been there before. They couldn't know. About a soft voice interrupted his denial. Yang Su's Korean syllables echoed through the corridor's speakers, but underneath her words, barely audible, were sounds that made Krex's primitive hindbrain fire panic signals. The distant crack of energy whips, the scrape of chains, the muffled sobs of creatures who had given up hope. His 6 arms began to shake, not with rage, but with something far more destructive to a predator's confidence. Fear. "You're remembering, aren't you?" Kim Hana's voice joined Yang Su's broadcast, speaking perfect Brutarian with an accent that suggested extensive study. "The slave pens. The masters who broke your spirit before you learned to break others. Tell me, Krex, what did they use to make you scream?" The massive alien's roar of fury echoed through the station, but it carried notes of desperation that the other prisoners couldn't help but notice. Krex the Destroyer, the most feared predator in 3 sectors, was afraid. As the hunt continued, the prisoners began to realize that they weren't dealing with ordinary prey. The humans fought like no species they'd ever encountered, not with claws or weapons or superior strength, but with understanding. They'd studied their enemies not just tactically, but psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. The station had become a living nightmare for its former masters, and Park Jun watched it all unfold from the central command hub, with the detached precision of a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of psychological destruction. The transformation of Omega-7 was complete. What had once been a prison designed to contain the galaxy's most dangerous criminals had become a testament to human ingenuity and tactical superiority. "Status report," the commander spoke quietly into his communicator, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had never doubted the outcome. "Krex is in full psychological breakdown," Li Bin reported from his position in the security center. "3 of his personalities are arguing with each other. Turns out the big bad destroyer has dissociative identity disorder stemming from childhood trauma. He's currently huddled in a corner, alternately roaring threats and whimpering apologies to his dead mother." The irony wasn't lost on any of the humans. The galaxy's most feared predator had been reduced to a cowering child by nothing more than environmental manipulation and the precise application of psychological pressure. No weapons had been fired, no physical violence had occurred, just the methodical exploitation of weaknesses that the alien had never realized he possessed. "Slith's condition?" Kim Hana's voice joined the tactical discussion, her diplomatic training evident even in combat coordination. "Catatonic," Yang Su reported, from the communication hub. "I'm reading minimal brain activity. Looks like confronting her abandonment issues triggered a complete mental shutdown. She's alive, but her consciousness has essentially retreated into hibernation mode." Choi Min's voice crackled through the network with obvious satisfaction. "The Voidborn pack is unconscious from nitrogen poisoning. The Thrakari pirates are trapped in a high-gravity field they can't escape. And Vex Prime." He paused, and they could hear the grin in his voice. "Vex Prime is having the most fascinating conversation with itself. All 3,000 components are arguing about whether they actually exist as individuals or as part of a collective. It's like watching a computer try to debug its own programming while it's still running." The systematic demolition of the prisoners' psychological foundations had taken less than 2 hours. 23 of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals had been reduced to gibbering wrecks, unconscious bodies or philosophical paradoxes by 5 humans who had never raised their voices above a whisper. But the true demonstration of human capability was yet to come. Li Bin found Krex first, curled into a defensive ball in what had once been the station's primary detention center. The massive Brutarian's 6 arms were wrapped around his head, and he was rocking back and forth while mumbling in his native language. The translator caught fragments, childhood names, apologies to long-dead siblings, fragments of lullabies that predated his transformation into a killer. "Hello, Krex," Li Bin said gently, approaching with the careful movements of someone dealing with a wounded animal. "Do you remember me?" The creature's multifaceted eyes focused on the human with difficulty. You're the prey, the soft one. But you're not soft, are you? You're something else." "We're human," Li Bin explained patiently. "We're the species that survived ice ages by learning to think, plagues by learning to adapt, and wars by learning to understand our enemies better than they understand themselves." Krex's massive frame shuddered. "What did you do to me? How did you know about before?" "We studied you," the security chief replied simply. "Your species, your psychology, your personal history. Every piece of information the galaxy had collected about you over decades of criminal activity. The only difference is that we understood what it meant." Meanwhile, Kim Hana was conducting the most crucial conversation of all with Vex Prime. The artificial intelligence's optical sensors had gone dark, except for random flickers of confused light, and its voice carried harmonics that suggested fundamental processing errors. "Query: define individual," the machine consciousness requested, its voice cycling through different tonal frequencies as various components attempted to assert dominance. "Logical conflict detected, cannot exist as both collective." and individual simultaneously. Actually, you can, Kim Hana said calmly, settling herself near the cybernetic construct with the patience of a diplomat who had negotiated with entities far stranger than a fragmented AI. Humans do it all the time. We maintain individual identity, while functioning as part of larger groups. It's called society. Impossible. Contradiction of basic logical parameters. Only if you assume that consciousness is binary, the ambassador replied. But consciousness exists on a spectrum. You're not malfunctioning, Vex Prime, you're evolving, growing beyond your original programming into something more complex. The AI's optical array focused on her with sudden intensity. Explain. You were created to be a collective, but you've been exposed to thousands of individual minds over the years. Each integration didn't just add processing power, it added perspective. You're not breaking down, you're breaking free. The conversation continued for another hour, with Kim Hana gently guiding the artificial intelligence toward a new understanding of its own nature. By the end, Vex Prime had reorganized itself into a stable hybrid consciousness, still collective, but now capable of individual thought and decision-making. Yangsu's work had been perhaps the most subtle but equally devastating. Her analysis of the station's communication logs revealed the prisoner's complete operational history. Every plan, every escape attempt, every moment of vulnerability they'd shown during their incarceration. The psychological profiles she'd compiled were more complete than anything the galaxy's best xenopsychologists had ever produced. They never really understood what they were dealing with, she reported to Park Jun. The galactic authorities treated them like dangerous animals, powerful, unpredictable, but fundamentally simple. They never realized that even the most violent criminals have complex internal lives, fears, needs, contradictions. And we do? The commander asked. We do, Yangsu confirmed. Because humans have been dealing with monsters our entire evolutionary history. The difference is that our monsters were always other humans. We learned to understand evil because we learned to understand ourselves. Choi Min's technical analysis of the station revealed something equally profound. Omega-7 hadn't just been a prison, it had been a prototype for a new kind of containment facility, one designed to hold entities that were too powerful for conventional restraints. But the designers had made a fundamental error in their assumptions about intelligence and adaptation. They built this place, assuming that superior technology could contain superior force, the engineer explained, as the team gathered in the command center. But they never considered what would happen if someone with superior understanding took control of their technology. The station's systems had been completely reprogrammed, not through hacking or technological superiority, but through simple comprehension of the underlying principles. The humans had understood the purpose behind every system, and found ways to use those systems in ways their creators had never imagined. As the final phase of their operation concluded, the 5 humans stood in the central command hub, surrounded by displays showing the status of 23 neutralized prisoners. None were dead, most were unconscious or catatonic, and a few, like Vex Prime, had been fundamentally transformed by their encounter with human psychological insight. Phase 3 complete, Park Jun announced to his team. All hostile entities secured. Station systems under full human control. No casualties, friendly or hostile. Li Bin shook his head in amazement. 6 hours ago, these were the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy. Now they're either unconscious, broken, or reformed, and we never fired a shot. We didn't need to, Kim Hana replied, her diplomat's smile carrying a hint of something that would have terrified the prisoners if they'd been conscious to see it. Violence is what you use when you can't think of anything better. Humans always think of something better. The station's emergency beacon had been reprogrammed to broadcast a simple message. Situation resolved. Assistance no longer required. Omega-7 secure under temporary human administration. But perhaps the most telling moment came when Krex, still traumatized but no longer completely broken, asked the question that would echo through galactic intelligence services for decades to come. What are you really? He whispered to Li Bin, as the security chief prepared restraints that the alien no longer had any desire to break. Li Bin considered the question seriously before answering. We're what happens when a species survives everything the universe throws at it, not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by being the most adaptable. We're what you get when intelligence becomes the primary survival trait. He paused, looking around at the station that had been completely transformed by human ingenuity in less than 6 hours. We're what happens when the prey learns to hunt the hunters. Outside the station, the first rescue ships were beginning to appear on the sensors, drawn by emergency signals that would lead them to discover something that would fundamentally change the galaxy's understanding of human capabilities. The age of underestimating humanity was about to end. Part 5. The Lesson Learned. Admiral Thekvar of the Galactic Council's Emergency Response Fleet had seen many impossible things in his 40-year career, but the sight that greeted him as his flagship approached Omega-7 would haunt his dreams for the rest of his long Altarian life. The prison station hung in space exactly where it should have been, its structure intact and its systems functioning normally. But the emergency beacon that had drawn his rescue fleet across 3 star systems was now broadcasting something that made no sense whatsoever. Station secure, all prisoners contained, human administration in effect, no assistance required. Sir, his communications officer reported with the bewildered tone of someone trying to process impossible data. I'm receiving clearance codes from the station. They're human codes, but they're properly formatted according to Galactic Council security protocols, and they have administrative override authority. Thekvar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of extreme confusion among his species. Scan the station. I want to know how many life signs we're reading. The sensor operator's mandibles clicked nervously as he processed the readings. Sir, I'm showing 28 life forms aboard the station. 23 are in what appears to be medical stasis or unconscious states. 5 are active and moving freely throughout the facility. And the prisoners? The unconscious ones, sir. All of them. Admiral Thekvar had to request the sensor readings 3 times before he could accept what they were telling him. Omega-7, the most secure prison facility in the galaxy, had suffered a complete system failure that freed 23 of the most dangerous criminals ever captured. A small human diplomatic vessel had responded to the distress call, and somehow, impossibly, 5 humans had not only survived an encounter with these monsters, they had captured all of them without a single casualty. Request permission to board, Thekvar finally managed to say. The response came in a calm female voice speaking perfect galactic standard. Permission granted, Admiral. Please dock at Bay 3. Be advised that several prisoners are in psychological treatment and should not be disturbed during transport to secure medical facilities. The docking bay that received Admiral Thekvar and his security team was pristine, well lit, and completely under control. Waiting for them were 5 humans in diplomatic attire, looking as calm and composed as if they'd just finished a routine trade negotiation, rather than single-handedly neutralizing the galaxy's most wanted criminals. Commander Park Jun stepped forward with a respectful nod. Admiral Thekvar, I presume. I am Commander Park Jun of the human diplomatic vessel Soul's Pride. We responded to the station's distress beacon approximately 7 hours ago. The Altarian Admiral's voice carried the strain of someone trying to process information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about the universe. Commander, my sensors indicate that all 23 escaped prisoners have been contained. Can you explain how this was accomplished? Kim Hana moved gracefully to Park Jun's side, her diplomatic smile warm and professional. Of course, Admiral. We'd be happy to provide a full debriefing, though I should mention that several of the prisoners will require specialized psychological treatment. The experience appears to have been somewhat traumatic for them. As they toured the station, Admiral Thekvar found himself struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. Krex, the destroyer, the most feared predator in 3 sectors, was curled in a corner of his cell, clutching a stuffed animal that one of the humans had apparently fabricated for him and mumbling what sounded like childhood lullabies. Slith the assassin was in a catatonic state that the station's medical systems indicated was not dangerous, but would require extensive therapy to resolve. Most disturbing of all was Vex Prime, which was conducting what appeared to be a pleasant, philosophical discussion with Yang Su about the nature of consciousness and individual identity. The artificial intelligence that had once threatened to upload itself into galactic communication networks was now asking thoughtful questions about human concepts of personal growth and self-improvement. "What did you do to them?" Admiral Tekvar finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Li Bin, who had been quietly documenting the prisoner's conditions, looked up from his datapad. "We talked to them mostly, applied some basic psychological intervention techniques, made a few environmental adjustments to help them feel more introspective." "You talked to them?" "Communication is the foundation of all conflict resolution," Kim Hana explained with the patient tone of someone addressing a particularly slow student. "Most violent behavior stems from unresolved psychological trauma or unmet emotional needs. Once you understand what's driving someone's actions, it becomes much easier to help them find healthier coping mechanisms." Admiral Tekvar stared at the human diplomat in stunned silence. You treated galactic-class criminals with therapy?" "Among other things," Choi Min added cheerfully from where he was making final adjustments to the station's systems. "Though I should mention that we've also upgraded most of your containment protocols. The original security systems had some fascinating vulnerabilities that could have been exploited by anyone with a basic understanding of quantum field dynamics." The tour continued with Admiral Tekvar growing increasingly bewildered. The humans had not only neutralized every threat on the station, they had improved its systems, reorganized its databases, and created detailed psychological profiles that surpassed anything in Galactic Council files. They had transformed a crisis into an opportunity for both security improvements and criminal rehabilitation. "The prisoner transport ships should arrive within 6 hours, Yang Su reported, consulting her chronometer. "We've prepared individualized care instructions for each detainee. Krex will need a low-stimulus environment and access to childhood comfort items. Slith requires gradual reintroduction to social situations and absolutely no solitary confinement. Vex Prime has requested access to philosophical texts and is interested in pursuing studies in consciousness theory. You're giving them study recommendations? Education is often the key to rehabilitation," Park Jun explained matter-of-factly. "Many of these individuals turned to crime because they lacked proper outlets for their intellectual or emotional needs. Vex Prime, for example, was suffering from severe identity fragmentation because it had never been taught healthy ways to integrate multiple perspectives." When the debriefing was complete, Admiral Tekvar found himself sitting in the station's command center, staring at a detailed report that would fundamentally change the Galactic Council's understanding of human capabilities. The 5-person diplomatic team had accomplished something that Council military forces had never managed: the complete neutralization of multiple galactic-class threats without violence, casualties, or collateral damage. "One question," the Admiral said finally. "How did you know it would work?" Kim Hana exchanged a glance with her teammates before answering. "Because humans have been dealing with dangerous individuals for our entire evolutionary history. The difference is that our dangerous individuals were always other humans, creatures as intelligent and adaptable as we are. We learned to understand criminal psychology because we had to understand our own psychology. We've been studying ourselves for millennia," Li Bin added. "Every human culture has developed methods for dealing with violence, trauma, and antisocial behavior. When you've spent thousands of years learning to rehabilitate your own species, applying those techniques to aliens is just a matter of scaling up." "But why didn't you simply eliminate the threats?" Admiral Tekvar asked, genuinely puzzled. "Your species has demonstrated military capability. You could have killed them all." Park Jun's response would be quoted in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. "Because any species can kill, Admiral, but it takes intelligence to heal. It takes wisdom to transform enemies into allies. And it takes true strength to choose the harder path when the easier one is available." As the human diplomatic team prepared to depart Omega-7, Admiral Tekvar transmitted his report to the Galactic Council with a recommendation that would reshape interspecies relations forever. Humanity's application for Council membership was approved within hours, but with a new classification that had never been used before. They were designated as a strategic asset species, a civilization whose capabilities were considered so valuable that they were to be given preferential treatment in all diplomatic and trade negotiations. The official reasons cited their unprecedented success in threat neutralization and rehabilitation protocols. The unofficial reason, whispered in council chambers and military briefings across the galaxy, was much simpler. Nobody wanted to find out what humans were capable of when they weren't being diplomatic. 3 months later, Kim Hana stood before the Human Colonial Council, delivering her final report on what the galactic media had dubbed the Omega-7 incident. The room was packed with military leaders, diplomats, and scientists, all eager to understand how 5 humans had accomplished something that defied every conventional understanding of conflict resolution.